Conversations on the issues that dog our holistic capabilities as a people has been work that Southern Africa Dialogue has been engaged in for the past 15 years. I really believe conversations allow us to enter into new thought arenas if we remain open to the reality that we are never 100% wrong or right. And oftentimes making progress as a people is actually not only about who is right and what is wrong and who is wrong. It's simply which ideas will authentically move the African capability agenda, irrespective of whose ideas they are. Maintaining that mental freedom to hear without judgment and without having a position to defend is one of the most difficult life competences to acquire. We all battle with low professional humility and assume that we have little to learn from those without impressive academic credentials. Yet most of us who are now at the helm of institutions are sons and daughters of semi-illiterate parents who understood financial management without going to formal school. They put us through school using empty jars of jam, where they saved the pennies for us to get an education they knew we had to have to survive the transition from the Africa they grew up in to the Africa they birthed us into, and through the Africa that would emerge as we grew. They had foresight without even being conscious of what that new face of Africa could possibly look like. But they knew something fundamental was shifting, and they prepared us for that. So it is my deep desire that this series of conversations, monologues if you want, dialogues sometimes, will release something into the hearts of our people to become what we really are. That somehow, through these conversations, we can become a bolder and more certain people who build an Africa where all its people who are prepared to work, of course, thrive. It is also my hope that those who are friends of Africa will deepen their understanding of the things that matter most to us. My intentions are not to criticize or make small of the progress we have made, but to simply provoke thought that shifts us from progress that is not driven by our own capabilities to a progress that boldly demonstrates that an Africa that thrives, measured by the life quality of the ordinary man, is now coming into being. Not every question I will ask has answers, but should stimulate us to think together to find those answers. Celebrating has much to do with what we are, what we were, and what we are becoming collectively. Our progressive consciousness may not necessarily be a priority issue across the demographic landscape. 2024, this year, marks 24 years into the 21st century, meaning we have almost lost completely those that had a living understanding of Africa from 1900 to 2000. Now, their reasons for celebrating today may not be the same as those born at the turn of the 20th century. Our millennials and alpha generation are the ones we need to have foresight for. Yet to be in their future requires that we understand their collective desires. Do they have a sense of our nationhood as African people? How far are we in the journey of African brotherhood? How far are we? Our demographic projections are showing a population explosion of young people set to quadruple. What will Africa look like when we exit? To what extent are we preparing them to handle the present well so that the evolution of Africa will not derail them, making them outcasts in their own land? Are those questions of concern to us today? Or are we preoccupied with the present economics that we forget the young people? The narrative of Africa is a heady cocktail of socio-cultural and economic extremities, abundance, lack, and everything in between. I'm not sure if these generations are enamored or embarrassed by the idea of being African. I call it an idea because in my humble observation, I've not seen an intentional knitting of our continental identity taking place in the learning and strategic decisions of everyday people. We have made wonderful strides towards freer movement across countries, better and more enabling trade policies, but the progress of the human development of our people seems to be without a comprehensive strategy. We speak of Ubuntu, but when we rub shoulders in business and communities, do we experience it? I believe our biggest struggle is with our identity and confidence in our capabilities to generate our own solutions for the problems that we must surmount to make our continent the desired habitat for our own people. Our young people are leaving the motherland in droves. Who will carry Africa into the future if the next generation are not connected to our own soil? Do we not need to understand why? Is it just the lack of economic opportunity, or there is something we are missing that makes our own home unattractive to its own children and extremely attractive to the children of other nations? If we look, for instance, at modernization as a factor that attracts our young people to leave, do we think if we were to improve infrastructure and technology, they would stay? If we match that, will they stay? Or we should perhaps match that with human development infrastructure? This is not about academic credentials and keeping abreast with AI, but becoming a viable people. What does it actually mean to be a highly developed African human being? What connects us to each other that makes us a brotherhood of Africans? Does that concept of a shared African identity go deeper than the shade of our own skin and texture of hair? Economic capability necessitates us being global citizens, but how do we strike a balance of being globally engaged yet remain intact in our humanity and culture? May I suggest that we reflect on the possible truth that our self-identity carries the DNA of our humanity. Who are we in 2024? Who will we be in 2050? who will be in 2200? What do we need to do to become a people with a shared conviction of what our human development looks like? In 86 years, our current millennial and alpha generation will be exiting the 100-year life cycle, leaving behind a new generation of Africans. What do we need to teach them today to safeguard African nationhood? Will those not yet born remember what it means to be African? What are our responsibilities for the next generation, and how do we develop and encode our Africanhood transgenerationally? We were always a warm people, vibrant, welcoming. We had people at the center of human communion, and we were very clear about what it meant to be human. If we can catch those who are still living, who belong to 1900 to 2000 era, will be dumbfounded of what an African worldview look like. Do we discard these as ancient, or do we preserve them as secret codes for our resilience and continuity as a people? For these, human development was not a financial index. They knew how to assess the personhood index with a technology called human wisdom. They shouldered the responsibility to ensure next generations were economically capable and viable as people. That philosophy kept them predominantly sentinels and practitioners of systems of social learning that kept us a people. How do we harness that which is dying? We seem to be struggling to modernize without losing our ways of cultivating Africans. Somewhere along the line, becoming modern societies has been mingled with loss of cultural identity and humanity. What is our concept of African modernization? Does it necessarily have to borrow its essence from the East or West, and now the cosmopolitan cultural melting pot? We can certainly learn from other nations, but should we not be concerned about using the blueprints of other cultures as our own? Every nation sculptures its economic strategy and philosophy from a cultural perspective. Who are they? What are they pursuing? And what is the end game for their nation and for their people? How clear are we on what we are pursuing, our economic philosophy, and the end game for our people? As mankind, we must coexist and love across color, race, ethnicity, but still safeguard our own. What does a successful African people look like? Is measuring our success by GDP an adequate indicator of progress and capability? Should we be looking at new cultural and human development linked indexes? Is it not perhaps time for us to discard poverty datum lines and start working on getting our people to a wealth datum line? Are these concepts that we can palette? And if we can, what would be the critical pathways to creating an Africa with a new narrative of massive populations of citizens with wealth in their humanity, personal, and national economics. Join us in our next episode as we explore possibilities for new narratives for Africa. Your host, Nyere Du Barah.